All right, we are in the third chapter of Daniel. We're skipping chapter 2 of Daniel. And let me just give you a quick synopsis in chapter 2. The king Nebuchadnezzar had a dream in chapter 2, and Daniel was able to interpret that dream, and he got promoted, and he was able to get his 3 friends promoted also at the end of chapter 2 because he was able to interpret the dream. And so now we go to chapter 3, and this is probably, we're not sure, but we get the idea that chapter 3 happened relatively quickly after chapter 2. Now, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, says this happened around 587, 586 BC. We're not exactly sure if that's true, but it's probably a good opportunity. There's probably a good chance that happened. This would have been about the 18th year of King Nebuchadnezzar's reign. This would have been the time when he actually destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, and would have been the third time that he exiled people from Jerusalem to Babylon. And so this would have been the third and final time when he mass exited a bunch of people to Babylon and really destroyed Jerusalem. And so for the most part, Jerusalem and Israel is just destroyed. And so here we are in chapter 3 of Daniel, and we're going to be looking at how to live with dual citizenship. And so as Christians, we have dual citizenship. We have a citizenship as a Christian in heaven, and we have a citizenship as most of us that are listening to this here in America. And this dual citizenship makes it difficult for us to exist in this country. And we live in a world where our culture goes against our Christian values. And so this is what we're going to see here in chapter 3. And the Bible warns us to be on guard about what the world offers. And so what does the Bible say? And so I want you to understand that this is nothing new, what we're going through in our culture. This has always been happening. It's always been happening. It's happening in the day of the 3 young men we're going to be reading about. But I just want to read here some scripture from 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. It says, "Do not love this world nor the things it offers you. For when you love the world, you do not have the love of the Father in you. For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, a craving for everything we see, and pride in our achievements and possessions. These are not from the Father, but are from this world. And this world is fading away along with everything that people crave, but anyone who does what pleases God will live forever." This passage is basically saying that you and I should understand that our citizenship in heaven means more. That what we should crave is our heavenly citizenship is more valuable than our earthly citizenship. All right? And I want you to understand something. And I'm not saying this to be mean. I just want you to understand this because I always hear Christians say this, and it boggles me. It boggles me when Christians say this, all right? And they'll say, "I can't believe people do this." And they'll go, do you believe that they did this? Do you believe that people voted this way? Do you believe it? And I just like, seriously? I want you to understand that pagans do not behave and think like Christians. Now, a pagan is just someone who's not a Christian. Pagans do not believe and think like Christians. And so when I see that they have voted a certain way, I go, that doesn't surprise me. Why would I think that culture would always vote the way Christians think they should vote? It doesn't surprise me, because we're not a Christian nation. And even if we can get our nation to vote a moral way, doesn't mean we're Christian. And so it's just important for us to understand that. And I want you to understand, pagans do not behave and think like Christians. And if you get that, then you won't always get upset when the world does things that are different than Christians. And at the same time, Christians do not behave and think like pagans. Now, this is when I get upset, when I see Christians acting like pagans. When I see Christians behaving like lost people. That's when I get frustrated. I don't get upset when lost people act like Christians. I get upset when Christians act like lost people, right? And so it's important for us to realize that we think differently. We act differently. And you know, I've heard people say this, you know. I've heard people say, let me see if I get this, if I say this right, you know. If you treat me a certain way, you know, I'm going to treat you a certain way. If you treat me right, I'm going to treat you right. Well, that might be how lost people talk. That's not how Christians talk. If you treat me wrong, we as Christians are going to still treat you right. Because that's how we as Christians are supposed to treat people. We don't treat you wrong because you treat us wrong. We treat you right because that's the way we're supposed to treat you. And that's just the way Christians, we think differently. And yet I see Christians, you hit me. I had a Christian one time say this, you know, the Bible says, you hit me, I'm supposed to turn the other cheek. I heard a Christian say this one time, I only have two cheeks. I think the Lord, you know, was meaning that we're supposed to keep turning the other cheek. I don't think he meant you only turn it twice. I don't think that was the point. We are different. And so we're going to go into this question here, and I want us to be more specific in your groups as you're talking in our hotspots. What are specific Christian values and beliefs that the world is attacking today, that we as Christians, we just think differently? And so discuss that in your hotspots. So what does the Bible say? Now, as I said here in, here we are in chapter 2, Daniel had gotten, because he had interpreted the dreams, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had gotten promoted because Daniel had asked the king to promote his friends, and so the king did. And so they have been promoted, and so that brings us here to chapter 3, and we want to talk about these three guys. Daniel is not mentioned in this story in chapter 3. We don't know where Daniel is. He is somewhere in the kingdom, but he is not in this story, all right? So, King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And he may have built this statue based on his dream in chapter 2. He had a dream about a statue, and Daniel had interpreted this statue being that it represented his kingdom, and so he might have built this statue based on this dream. And verses 7 and 8, so at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race or nation or language, were to bow at the ground and worship this gold statue the king Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed on the Jews, which would have been Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these astrologers were going to tattle on these guys. And verse 11 said that decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon. Now, they could have been jealous. We don't know their motivation. We don't know what their motive was. But they pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue that you have set up. Now, I want you to know that unfortunately, our culture always pushes us to worship man and his ideas instead of God's. And so here, this king has this statue, and he wants these guys he wants everybody to worship this statue. And so we see this in culture. We always are pushing, culture's always pushing people to worship man or a man's ideas instead of God. You're the right God. And so here's what we see again. And so this is happening today, and again, it's happening way back 2,600 years ago, all right? And so verse 14 says, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?" Now he knows who they are because he's promoted them. "That you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I've set up. I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue that I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace." And I love this question. He says, "And then what God," he says this, "what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Now, what's fascinating is King Nebuchadnezzar has a very short memory. He has a very short memory because in chapter 2, when Daniel was the only one who could interpret his dream, Daniel, he says, "Daniel, you're the most incredible guy that you could interpret my dream." Daniel goes, No. I couldn't interpret your dream. My God was the one who told me how to interpret your dream. He said this, the king said to Daniel, "Truly your God is the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings, the revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret." So he's now forgotten that he has said, your God is the greatest of gods, and he has posed this question, what God can save you? And so we want to go to this question now. Why do unbelievers often react strongly when Christians disagree or resist joining in some sinful practice? So talk amongst yourselves about that. All right, so how can we learn from this? How can we learn from what these guys did? So how can you obey? How can you obey? Well, Daniel chapter 3, verses 16 through 18, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king. They said, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But," I love verse 18, "but even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up." Verse 18, I want to say that again. Even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. They knew their scriptures. They knew their scriptures. Remember Exodus 20, verses 3 and 4? "You must not have any other gods before me." You must not make any, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead of there. "You must not have any other God before me. You must not make for yourself any idol of any kind or any image of anything in the heavens or in the earth or in the sea." They knew that. They knew that. And so what I find fascinating is They are captives in another country, and yet they know their God is superior. They are captives, they have been exiled from their country, and yet they know. And so, what I find fascinating is the story is about their resolve, not the outcome. Now, everybody wants to go to their outcome. If you know the story, most of you do. The king is furious. He has the furnace made 7 times hotter than it normally is. He gets some of his strongest guys. They bind these 3 guys up. They throw them into the furnace. It is so hot that the soldiers that throw them in, they die just because it's so hot, because they get so close. These 3 guys get thrown in. The king looks down into the furnace. He gets as close as he can, and he goes, hey, didn't we throw 3 guys in? I see 4. Now, most theologians think that the 4th guy is clearly an angel, and most think that it's actually Jesus. What they think is a Christophany. It's actually Jesus there as the 4th person, which I agree with that. And so it's either an angel or Christ. I think it's Christ. And so Christ is there protecting them. They come out, their clothes are not even burnt. They don't even smell like smoke. The king says, come out. They walk out. And it's an amazing story. And so it's, you know, the thing is we can go, wow, God protected them. I almost wish God didn't, because the history is filled with what we call martyrs. History is filled with men who didn't. There's a guy named Nate Saint. What an interesting name. His last name is Saint. His real last name is Saint. He lived from 1923 to 1956. He was martyred as a missionary to a segment of the Auca Indians in Ecuador. And he went down there and he was trying to witness to these group of people, and he was killed. And this is what he said: the way I see it, we ought to be willing to die. In the military, we're taught to obtain our objectives. We had to be willing to be expendable. And missionaries must face that same expendability. And so we could spend hours talking about people who have gone and preached the gospel and have died. And so to me, it's about the resolve. These 3 guys said, hey, if God doesn't save us, we're not going to bow down. And it's, to me, about the resolve. And so that's what I think is important. And so what we need to realize is there's 3 things that we need to decide to be like these guys. The first thing is, if we're going to serve the Lord, is we need to serve God only. We need to make that decision. Second is we need to realize that we need to trust that God knows what's best for us. Period. God knows what's best. And then the third thing is whatever comes our way, we need to trust that God's providential plan is best. We need to trust in it. Always trust in God's providential plan, that His plan is best. And we need to trust that. And if we do those 3 things, God will take care of us, and we are working in what His mission in this world is. And like I said, we have two citizenships. We have one in heaven and one here, but we are working primarily for the citizenship in heaven. Does that make sense? I hope that does. I hope that does. As we strive to become more like Christ, as we study the Bible, serve others, and share our